All right, looks like we are officially recording and up and running. Excellent. Switching it to speaker view. So we'll get theoretically one person at a time here. But officially, welcome everyone to the Murderbirds author Q&A. This is one of those things that came from the stretch goals of the Murderbirds Kickstarter campaign. And once we pass a certain point, it's like, all right, we're going to get as many of the authors together as we can so that we can, have people be able to ask you all questions and hear from some of the authors about what kinds of things they write, hear about their individual stories, and some of the birds that they feature. And I'm going to briefly introduce, before she freaks out a little bit too much, one of the murder birds who inspired this thing. This is Lutra the parrot. And yes, Lutra often sits with me on these calls, and sometimes she gets antsy. So in a little bit, I will probably be pausing and putting her to bed. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Jack Stoumbos. I'm the curator and editor of the Murderbirds Anthology, and also interconnected with a lot of different writing, support, and education groups. And for this anthology, we pulled from those ones. So these were people involved in Superstars writing seminars, Apex Writers Group, the Writers of the Future cohort that we were in. So those of us in volume 38 and some previous volumes who were there at that cohort. And then also drawing from Wolf Moon's Wolf Pack. And Wolf is not able to make it this evening, but he wants me to tell everyone hi in his absence, and to wish luck to the people who are part of the Wolf Pack who are here and speaking today. And I'm going to go ahead and go through the list and want to get a chance for everyone to introduce themselves. So for each of the authors, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to, pop on camera and microphone if you're able. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you write. You don't have to go through the full bio or anything, but a little bit about what you write. And then for your story, if you can give us the title, the bird it features, and maybe a brief teaser sentence. And if you're not sure what the brief teaser sentence is, title and bird totally works, and we can go from there. All right, so I'm going to actually go ahead and turn this one over to Rebecca E. Treasure to get us started. So yeah, Becky, if I can switch it over to you, and then I'll just work on down the list.
Hello, thank you. So I'm Rebecca Treasure, and I write science fiction, fantasy, horror, historical fantasy. I'm also an editor at Apex Magazine of their flash fiction, and I write books that have yet to find a home, but they will someday. My story is called An Unkindness, and it's about ravens, and it's about ravens acting as harbingers of death.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. We're going to switch this over to John K. Patterson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is John K. Patterson. I write science fiction and fantasy, and I've been published on Amazon and in a couple of other anthologies as well. My story is titled Outback Attack, a Queensland crater story, because it's part of the Queensland crater universe. It's basically Jurassic Park set in near future Australia. And the bird that I feature is the terror bird that he showed the picture of earlier. Its name is Kellenken. There's like a whole bunch of them, but I picked like the biggest, meanest one of all. And yeah, there it is. Yeah, and basically the story is about a photographer who has never learned the hard way that you should stay in the car when you're on a safari.
Probably a good lesson for all of us, yeah. Thank you, John. All right, I'm going to switch it on over to Martin.
Hello, everyone. I am Martin L. Shoemaker. I am a writer of mostly science fiction, occasional fantasy, and sometimes I get pulled into weird directions like strange bird stories, such as the story of the crow sentry, who fails in his mission to protect the flock one desperate, dire night, and the entire flock gets kidnapped for some evil, nefarious purpose that no crow could really understand, but it's bad. And Sentry is put off by this and feels his honor is besmirched, and the only way to get it back is the fat man's gotta die. And that's the title.
Yeah. Yeah, as a title, I will also say what I was reading this one. Like immediately while reading it out loud for this lection, like a voice popped into my head, and it was like this very over the top, like like Hollywood gangster kind of crow person. The fat guy's gotta die, and it was impossible to break away from that the entire time I was reading it. I loved the story. That was a ton of fun.
You got exactly the right voice. How a crow with that voice ends up on the California shore is another question.
Yep.
But that's exactly the voice in my head.
Excellent. Well, you put it across very well, so it was easy to find. Hello, Lutra. All right. Let's switch it on over to Crystal. Go ahead, Crystal.
Hi, I'm Crystal Crawford. I write mostly fantasy, sometimes sci-fi, young adult fantasy. My story is Cheerhawks with a side of murder, and it's about Harris Hawks. And it's sort of like a detective murder mystery, teen detective with a paranormal twist. So sort of like a Buffy the Vampire Slayer vibe, but with hawks.
Awesome. Yeah. And I have I actually have the illustration for that one as well that we'll be putting out in a near future update. All right. Thank you, Crystal. Going to David. And David, congratulations on a recent win. I feel like I have to preface with that.
Thank you.
Can tell you all about that as well.
My name's David Hankins. I'm a recent winner of Writers of the Future, and I write light-hearted speculative fiction, fantasy, science fiction. And my story is Felix and the Flamingo, which features a cranky red-tailed hawk and a dim-witted flamingo who are trying to escape captivity after a failed neural enhancement experiment by their human captors. So as far as a teaser, the first line of this is Felix ruffled his red tail feathers in irritation. Of all the birds to get quarantined with, why a flamingo? Flamingos are idiots.
Excellent. Thank you, David. All right, Jenny, go ahead.
Sure. I'm Jenny Perry Carr. I'm based in Dallas, and I write sci-fi, horror, and fantasy. My story is called Blood on the Wing, and it features the Gear Falcon. It's the largest of the falcons and prized for falconry. This story, it's about an impatient sorcerer's apprentice that takes his training into his own hands, and he accidentally stirs up a flock of gear falcons into a violent frenzy. And of course, the only way to fix this problem is more magic, right?
Excellent. All right, thank you, Jenny. I'm gonna go ahead and scroll further down. Unless I'm skipping anybody on the list, and you can let me know later if I did accidentally. Jumping to Michael. Michael is coming to us from the greatest distance and the greatest time zone shift of the evening. Thank you, Michael, for joining us.
Yes, no worries. Yes, I am Michael Panther, the famous Michael Panther. English author, currently living in Sweden. I write almost exclusively secondary world fantasy, and was published in Writers of the Future volume 38 this year. My story for this anthology is called Give One to the Soul, and it features a female assassin out on the hunt to gain vengeance for her younger brother. Got a little tagline here. In fact, no, the bird as well, the bird that it features is a bird that I actually made up, called Vidrada. They're sort of these hell sort of demonic birds from mythology, my own mythology, of course. And anyway, the tagline: vampires, wolfmen, the undead. Bree has seen and slain them all. Now just one final quarry stands between her and sweet vengeance, but not all monsters are created equal.
Yeah, it's a very chilling story. And I will say that also, as having read it and having passed it around through a group of readers, very chilling story, very fun for people who like a little bit of the dark fantasy. Yeah, thank you, Michael. Go ahead to Nicole.
Hello, I'm Nicole Haskell. I write mostly speculative fiction, fantasy, science fiction, and a bit of horror on occasion. Recently in volume 38, Writers of the Future. And my story for this is called Whatever Lola Wants. And it is about a murderous blue-footed booby. because I could think of nothing more ridiculous than that scenario. And so it's basically this angry blue-footed booby terrorizing this small resort in the Galapagos Islands. And that's the premise of the story.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Scrolling on down to Ryan. Fellow Virginian, Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan Cole. I mostly write fantasy, but sometimes I do sci-fi and I dabble in horror a bit. The name of my story is The Boy He Wove, and it features a peacock. And it's about a necromancer who uses his powers to create the son that he's always wanted out of recycled bones and various other creatures.
I love how you smile at the end of that, as if it's a totally normal thing. Yeah,
It's a very lighthearted story.
Awesome. All right, going to Yelena. And as a quick preface, if you have not met Yelena or seen pictures on social media lately, there's been an excellent series with knives for the Murderbirds Kickstarter and the things that followed. So go ahead.
Hi, I'm Elena Crane. This is the knife in question. I mainly write science fiction, sometimes dabble into fantasy, and lately kind of Black Mirror type horror. My story is called, what is it called? Forget Me Not and Morning Dew. And it's about a man trapped as a secretary bird. That's what it features. And I'll just read you the first 2 sentences. Ignore my slick down feather mane, my stilt legs that kick with power 5 times my weight, my wings that rip through air. I am a man. I will be man again. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks. And then finally, so last but definitely not least, the author of the preview story that is currently online and is going to be pulled immediately following this. For anyone who hasn't already gotten a chance to read it, they'll get it again during the publication. I'm going to pull in ZT Bright. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Yep, I'm ZT Bright. I write out of Salt Lake City. Science fiction, fantasy, pretty much anything in that arena. And my story was called The Delicious Irony of Dino Nuggets. And it features the chicken. Perhaps you've heard of that. It's about a sentient or sapient species of parasites who travel space-time searching for the biggest, baddest predators throughout all of space-time and somehow make their way to a chicken.
Somehow. Yes. Through no fault of their own, make their way to a chicken. Yeah. And just because, we're going through the list of stories, one more that I'm going to make note of is the one that's featuring the bird on my hand here. Yes, Lutra does make an appearance. There is a story in here about this bird who inspires me by doing so many things that she's not supposed to. And in particular, she will frequently climb off of me to jump around on the desk and somehow will stamp out words on the keyboard that I can't duplicate. I can't figure out how she makes those characters. So naturally, I wrote a story about her summoning a demon by stamping on the wrong keys in the wrong order, or the right keys in the right order. And as you might assume, tragedy and hilarity ensue. But moving on from that, so yeah, we've got a few questions that are prepared for the authors who are here. For authors who didn't pop a name on the spreadsheet, if you want to go check that out, that's in the event that I'd shared with you previously. But you can make sure that we get some questions out to you, and then otherwise to the audience, if you have questions for specific authors or for the group in general, I'm going to be asking for those a few questions from now, and you can start brainstorming them, type them into the chat. If you heard about any particular birds and you're very curious about how those birds make up a story, then yeah, that's one of those things that would be a reasonable thing to ask about. Cool. So let's see. Candace asked about Wolf Moon's story. Yeah, so Wolf Moon, who's not here, Wolf, also a previous Reg of the Future winner. he was able to join us as one of the bonus stories. So in the Kickstarter, we set up a couple of stretch goals to pull in bonus stories, and we got one from Wolf Moon at the second bonus story. Actually, the first bonus story that we pulled in was actually from Crystal. So it was excellent to be able to get the Cheerhawk story in there. And then we pulled in Wolf after that, and Wolf's story is about vultures. But very specifically, it's going to be an alien breed of vultures. And so if you're somebody who likes digging into the military science fiction vein and seeing what an alien boneyard might look like, then you'll get to see Wolf Moon's alien version of vultures. All right. So one of the first questions that I like to ask of these kinds of things is about like how people come up with their story ideas, because there are a lot of different ways that you might be inspired to write something, and other than a call going out saying, hey, we're going to be looking for stories about birds with murderous intent, I'm curious how people came up with their stories. And ZT, actually, if you want to pick up from there and just jump right back on.
Yeah. So I think the title of the anthology, Murderbirds, gives you some nice fertile soil to work with on that one. But as I was thinking, I knew I wanted to write something for it, so I had to figure it out. But prior to hearing of the anthology, pretty shortly prior to that, I was talking to my son, my 11-year-old, in the car, and he brought up something from school, as they do. I can't remember what it was, but dinosaurs were involved. And dinosaurs, descendants of birds. They did some fair share of murdering, some of them. So I took it from there, and we were talking about in the car, we were talking about the T-Rex, and just how the closest relation to the T-Rex was the chicken. At least that's what I'd heard. Maybe that's changed. But anyways, it was just kind of funny. We kind of were joking about how, something so powerful and feared and fearsome could evolve over time to, something as lowly as the chicken, which is now one of the main food sources on the planet for us. And make matters worse, we desecrate the memory of the T-Rex by shaping its ancestors or the descendants into the shape of their bodies. So that's where the idea came from. I had a couple ideas playing around. That was the humorous idea, and I rolled with it.
Yeah, and for anyone who hasn't read any of ZT's stuff, you have a habit of coming up with sort of these long, entertaining, I'm going to say pun based titles. It's definitely gives you a mini pitch at the story just from reading the title, which is always part of the fun there. Awesome. Nicole, same question. How'd you come up with the idea for your story?
So I originally wrote a different story, and then started kind of double clutching on it. I didn't ultimately think it was going to be a good fit. And so I kind of tossed that aside and just decided to come up with the most ridiculous concept I could, which was blue-footed boobies are one of my favorite birds because they are just adorable to look at and kind of dumb, quite frankly. And they're bigger than you think. They're about the size of a Canadian goose. So they're big enough to actually be something dangerous, but they're not smart enough to actually know what to do with it. And they're just completely trusting. They don't know fear of humans. So I took that thought and was like, well, what if one of them figured out they hated humans and they were trapped on this island with them and really decided they were going to do some damage, and just kind of played around with that and had fun with it. Ended up writing a story I normally wouldn't write. So it ended up kind of being more of a cozy mystery versus the normal very dark stuff I tend to gravitate towards. So yeah, I'm happy with the result, and I'm glad it made the cut.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I enjoyed the heck out of it, and I do think that cozy mystery was one of those things that we would have been missing if we did not have something like that. So yeah, I appreciated having something that wasn't necessarily the norm as well.
Thank you.
Awesome. Elena, if you can jump in from there.
So there was a while back a thing on Twitter about the sexiest birds, the top 5 hottest birds, and number 1 was the secretary bird. This is before like a few days before I heard about this Murderbirds thing. And so as soon as I saw Murderbirds anthology and that you want vultures, I was like, it's got to be the secretary bird. So that was how it happened. But that video is hilarious. Everyone should go look at it.
Awesome. And going to Rebecca.
Thanks. So I did the same as Nicole, and I started off with actually a cozy mystery. It was a very complicated story about like a demon worshiper and Shrike sticking fingers on pine needles in like a small town in Wyoming. But it wasn't really going anywhere, and I wasn't sure how the mystery was actually gonna like untie. So I just set that aside, which I don't usually do, and just kind of pantsed my way through a very personal story. It's just barely speculative and it's kind of voicey. And it works out, but usually I finish the stories that I start, but this time I was like, I don't know where this is going. So I'm just going to pants my way to the end of something new.
Yeah, I'm sensing a theme. Apparently you throw people at a an interesting title like Murderbirds and they do something new. I'm okay with that. I don't mind that at all. All right, Martin.
Well, I have to be a little coy because answering the question is an awful lot of spoilers for my story. But I can say that as soon as I was told the theme, I had the basic idea all set. But I will say this much. The behavior of the birds is very accurate, that crows post sentries that are the younger birds who basically have to stay up all night watching for trouble and squawking to alert the flock. And I will also say that, as Mike is well aware, this is based on a true story.
Yeah, I was when I started reading it, I was very excited because I felt like I caught hints about the true story, and it was one of those things where I was like, oh, there's an overlap of certain niche knowledge, and I wanted it to turn out the way that it did, and I was really glad that it did. Amusing thing that I haven't told many of the people who are in the anthology, during a lot of the selection process, I was taking the stories and I was reading the first like 2 to 5 pages out loud to a couple of my friends who were visiting and who are part of like my first reader circle, just to kind of see what they responded to. And so there are a couple of them where I was like, all right, want to get like what people are reacting to without naming the title of the story or the authors. And so that one, for the beginning, there was a lot of intrigue, and I was like, I think I know where this is going, and I'm really excited. I can't stop. Yeah, there was a lot of that with a lot of the stories, which is quite a bit of fun. Cool. So we're going to jump into a different question. For this one, we actually have a full new cast of people to answer it. So the follow-up to this is kind of like, what is your favorite part of your story? And or what did you find most enjoyable about writing it? So if there was something that you really like that stood out and you want to tell us about it, hopefully without too many spoilers, and or if there's something that you just like really got into the writing process. And during this one, I will also probably nip out to put her to bed because she's getting more antsy. But David, can you get us started there?
Sure.
What was your favorite part of the story?
Yeah, so mine, I ended up pulling my story, the world and the characters from another story I'd written that was at the time still waiting for a response, because I knew I only had a couple of days to turn it around. So my favorite part of it is one of those characters who is Bruiser the Rat. He's cheerful, violent, and British. So he's basically a soccer hooligan. And so, yeah, just the antics that he gets into that somehow make everything work out despite it being, completely ridiculous as he's doing it. So.
All right. And going to Jenny.
Oh, yeah, sure. Actually, I'm going to echo a bit of what David said here. I turned to an older story. I had a couple characters that I really liked from a story that I had written a couple years ago that was like a really tropey, bloated story that didn't go anywhere about a sorcerer's apprentice. But I really liked the characters that I had created. The apprentice was really self-important, headstrong, cocky, kind of funny, and I really liked him. And then the grizzled old wizard who's like super, super powerful, kind of Dumbledore-esque. Loved where he was going, and I kind of missed these characters. And so when the call came up for this anthology, and I was thinking about it, oh, do I have something? And I thought maybe I don't know. And then these characters kept popping back into my head, and I thought, I think I've got something here. And so that was really fun to like get to be with these characters again, and turn this big 5,000 word story and really hone it down into like a new, more compelling story for this anthology. Was really fun to do. So yeah.
Awesome, thanks. Switching on over to Ryan.
Hi. I think my favorite part of this story was coming up with the magic system. So it's necromancy based, like raising things from the dead. So I had one version of that was based in, it was called bone knitting, like melding bones together with this magical thread. And then comparing that to flesh knitting, so knitting like the skin of other dead birds and creatures together with a different kind of thread, and figuring out how the two of them were different or similar, so that it was clear to the reader which one was having an effect on the boy being woven into this living creature. And so that was really fun. And then in one part of the story, there is a duel between a wielder of one bone knitting and a wielder of flesh knitting. So I think that was my favorite part to come up with.
Excellent. Yeah, I would agree. So Becky has noted in the chat that it sounds grisly. I would agree. Yes, but very captivating. There are certain stories where it's like it's a little bit disturbing, or maybe a lot disturbing, but you really want to keep reading to know what happens next. So that's a big part of the fun. Awesome. And John, go ahead. Tell us about your favorite part of the story.
Well, obviously, I've been like a lifelong Jurassic Park fan, and Michael Crichton is one of my favorite authors for that. He made a really good point, like in some of his speeches, about how we tend to underestimate the danger and the apathy that nature has toward human life. Like we tend to think of animals as like these cute little Disney things, or tame like in zoos. The natural world just doesn't care. And I wanted to, I had thought it'd take it forever to actually concoct a good idea for a story, but finally I just settled on a photographer who underestimates the danger that he's in because he's been able to get away with it beforehand. He's just never been in like that kind of dangerous situation before. He's always been able to run away from a problem, and now he has to learn that nature doesn't care if you've been in a 100-meter dash.
Yeah, next time you get into a fight with nature, just hold up your resume and be like, no, it's okay, I have all this experience. We'll see how well it works.
That'll
Yeah,
work great.
As a nice segue on the nature front, so we're going to slip in another question here. So somebody had asked a question for any of the authors on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of an ornithologist would you say you are? And how did that play into your writing process? So I'm curious if if I can get the authors to just like drop in the chat, like feel free to put to everyone on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of an ornithologist do you think you are? Or for those of you who are on the dinosaur side, how much of a dinophile would you say that you are? And then I can just go through the kind of quick list there. I will say for my part, I don't know if I would call myself an ornithologist in any kind of practice sense, but on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being nothing and 10 being a whole darn lot, I think I've got to be at least at a 5. I love birds. I own birds. I am I'm somebody who has been into birds for a very long time. So naturally, I will think about stories in which they try to kill us or we try to kill them. That's what authors do, I guess. But anyway, so looking at the list, Martin has gone for 1, Elena 0, ZT solid 3. Nicole's joining the 3. 1 from David, a 3 with a question mark from Rebecca, 0 from Michael. John says 10 on Dinophile. Yep. He said 4 on Biologist. Yep. Chris says 6. Cool. Yeah. Birds, not dinos. Yep. Nice. Yeah. So we've got a bit of a range here. And out of curiosity, because we've got a kind of an impromptu questions on this one, Candace asked if we have anyone else who has pet birds. Do we have any other pet bird people on the call? Maybe or maybe not. No?
I guess I did. I had ducks. We lost our last one just recently, but we had ducks for a few years.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a duck when I was a kid. It was,
yeah, I had birds as a kid. That was it.
Yep. Grew up with chickens, not as pets. Yeah. Ah, yes, they were working chickens. Yeah. ZT has commented on the chickens as tasty pets. Yeah. Cool. All right. So for those of you who have questions that you want to ask to the group or to specific authors, feel free to type those into the chat, or if you want to send them directly to me, you're welcome to do that as well. I'm going to go ahead and switch into kind of talk about the process. So whenever people are talking to authors, there's always that big umbrella and sometimes that confusing Indiana Jones style vault of the process. And I'm curious to hear a little bit of a snippet to look behind the door for some of you and find out kind of what your process is like. And given that we don't have a half an hour for each person to go into all of their steps, give us a couple of the highlights or the tidbits, things about your process that you think stand out, or just make your stories what you need to make them, and sometimes in the time that you need to turn them in. Alrighty. So we're going to go ahead and start with Crystal on this one. So Crystal, tell us a little bit about your writing process.
Okay, so I actually really struggled with writing this story because it took me forever to come up with an idea. But typically, I need to kind of see the opening scene in my mind clearly. I'm looking for like a feel. And then once I settle on that opening scene, I try to think through, if I can't think all the way to the ending, because usually I feel like there's a layer of fog on my story, like I can't see to the ending. I need to at least kind of understand like a major turning point that I'm aiming for, and then I just pant in between. That works for me for short stories. I can't do that for longer pieces, or I get horribly lost and stressed. I need more of the structure, but for short stories, that's my process.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, so we kind of got like a signpost or like a checkpoint method where he pants in between. You might hear people talk about pantsing and plotting. I mean, especially because it's also November and some people on this call might be doing NaNoWriMo or National Novel Writing Month. The idea of, are you a plotter? Do you plan it out, or are you a pantser might come up. So if you hear that, that tends to be what we're referring to. Awesome. All right, jumping to ZT.
Yeah, I kind of go a little bit of the opposite of Crystal. I've got to know the end. So I'll start with the seed, and then my process is to kind of think through where the ending is. What is it about? Think about the character arc. What does the character initially start with wanting? What does the character end up realizing they need by the end of it? And so there's my starting point. And then I just kind of start from the other end after I know those things, and after I know where it's ending, start the character a fair ways off from that distance and emotionally. And then in terms of process generally, actually, Mike, you mentioned it. A lot of times I'll start with the title. Once I have an idea of what's happening with that, I will, so a title will come to me, and that just helps me get into the tone and the voice of the story. And so this one, The Delicious Irony of Dino Nuggets, as I was starting to just kind of compile my thoughts on what this was going to be about, that jumped out at me and set the tone for it. And And yeah, from there, I kind of know, again, from beginning to the end. And then I just try to make sure that my plot points throughout, that I know, what the character is going to try to do to solve the problem and how it gets worse. Rinse and repeat a few times and then get to that ending that I had in mind. So this one, I was actually on a plane. I had been on vacation for a week or so and hadn't had any time to write for quite a while. So I knew I was going to have good several hours of time to do nothing else but think and write. And late flight, kids were sleeping, so it was just time to start thinking, and that's when it all came to me.
Nice. Yeah. And we have a follow-up question. So ZT, if you still want to pop on here, there's a question about how do you come up with your two cool titles? You told us a little bit about this one. Do you have any brief advice or wisdom from the head of Bright to tell us about how you come up with those titles?
No, I guess I've got a strange brain. Things just happen. No, I don't know. I think after a while of writing, I was, as a beginner, I was trying to come up with really cool, deep titles. And after a while, just, you get rejected a lot with writing. You kind of are, you just get to a point where you're like, screw it. And I just threw words on a page, and then when I get to that point, and then my voice starts coming through, and yeah, I think that's where it is. So if you're looking for advice on titles, just screw it. Just throw whatever comes to mind on the page.
You heard it here today, everyone. Screw it. All right, we're going to switch over to Becky. Tell us a little bit about your process.
I am a pantser's pantser. I actively rebel against any kind of plot structure on drafting. So I just sit down and I word vomit as quickly as possible to exercise the story demon onto the page. And then I worry about things like plot point and character arc, and things get worse and all of emotional development after I've gotten the whole thing out. Because if I plot beforehand, then I don't care about the story. I'm like, well, I know what's going to happen. Who cares? So, and that's just how my process works. So I write first, discover the character voice, the story mood, kind of word by word. It feels very subconscious some days. And then on editing, I go back and try to make it seem like I knew what I was doing the whole time.
Yeah, I feel like that ties into there's a Neil Gaiman comment about secret of the second draft is making it look like you had the plan all along in the first,
right.
Or however I'm butchering that. I also appreciate that you said word by word at a time where we could really pull out bird by bird.
I missed it.
That is the first time that I've thought about that pun in relation to this anthology. So we'll go from there. And for those of you who are typing questions in the chat, I'm making note of them, and I'll try to get through them as we go. And if I miss them by the end, feel free to pop it back in. Yeah. So segueing from here, Elena.
I so badly want to be a plotter. I've tried so hard to be a plotter, and it's just the stories that come out when I plot are horrible. They're awful. I can't do it. So I'm a pantser. There are just no pants. That's how bad I'm a pantser. And so for this story, now I forgot the question. Oh, it's the process. So initially, before, it was a lot about sometimes visually seeing a scene, kind of like a movie playing out, or having a line in mind or an ending in mind, something. For more recently, though, what I'll have is usually a character voice in mind and let that drive the story. Very early on in my writing, I always wanted to hit an important theme. And I found that doing a character voice, I may not always land the theme that I'm going for, but the story winds up being much more fun for me to write and more interesting. And so with this story, when I figured out it's Secretary Birds, I knew, okay, well, where are they indigenous to? South Africa. What's the language there, and what's the lingo and the slang like? And so then I went into that, and then I was like, wow, I'm learning a lot of Afrikaans right now, and I've written nothing. But that's it. So research is a lot of my process, and then character voice, I would say. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah. And Ryan.
I'm pretty much the complete opposite. I have to meticulously plot and outline everything, or else I get really stressed out. Like if I just try to come up with the plot as I go, I just can't do it. It doesn't work. And I'd say 95% of the time I start with the title and I build the story off the title. Or if not the title, then just one word. So like in this case, I came up with the word bone knitter and I just wrote the whole story based off of that. And I usually have an idea for the beginning, like the first sentence. Sometimes I build it off of that. And even when I plot the whole story out, the ending usually changes once I actually get around to it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm appreciating that we're hearing a range on it. One of the things I'm going to pull this from Martin, because Martin says it often. It's the there are 9 and 60 ways of constructing tribal A's, and every one of them is right. So yeah, if you're writing a story that you like, and especially if if we follow this whole proof of the pudding is in the eating commentary, if you write a story, you like it, and then you sell it, and other people like it, then clearly you did something right, regardless of whether you meticulously planned or had no plan whatsoever, but it happened to happen. So yeah, cheers in all cases. All right. I'm going to go to the next question we've got. What is something you struggled with while writing your story, and how did you deal with it? And we're going to start with Michael. Michael, who is coming to us from very late. Thank you for staying awake.
Oh, what's the switcheroo? I think I was like the third or fourth person in the spreadsheet next to that question. So
I wasn't purely queuing. I was trying to. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. So my story was actually sort of a rehash of a story that I'd written for another prompt. I think a year, maybe 2 years before. Because I always plan very well and I have dates and schedules sort of on my calendar as I'm writing, I missed the deadline for that prompt by a day. So I had that story and no home for it. And this was like a sort of perfect fit. As you touched on, Mike, before, it's very dark. It's very dark. But it was a perfect fit apart from I wasn't sure where to put the bird. Or what shape the bird would take, and since this is a bird anthology, that was pretty key. There's more than one bird that features in the story. Without trying to sort of give any spoilers, there are a number of birds that were in the original, but I didn't think any of them sort of lent the necessary oomph to sort of get it over the line and make it sort of really bird centric, which is where my sort of love for writing secondary world and sort of going off on my own weird tangent in my brain sort of came into play. So the hardest part for me, ironically, was actually making it enough about a bird to qualify for a bird-centric anthology. And I sort of got over that by just sort of making it as birdy as possible within the confines of what I'd already written, because as I said, it was the story was already on the page. I just had to rehash it and make it work. But it was a lot of evenings spent sort of in a row sweating over how to make it seamless and not look as though I'd taken an old story and just whacked a bird in the center of it. But hey, Mike accepted it, so it worked, right?
I can tell you that I had absolutely no idea that it was an old story that was rehashed, and I'm absolutely shocked, and I can pretend to be appalled. But yeah, no, I it worked great. It did feel like a very bird forward story. Yeah, and it was, and I'll note we did very few stories that had birds that were not at least based in something in reality. So like out of the 20 stories in the whole thing, we only had 2 that were purely mythical birds. And Michael, even yours felt like it was kind of in that category of a crow and raven story. So we've got a specific crow story, a specific raven story, and then a mythological crow raven based story. And so that, the 3 together work pretty well. So it was definitely good to be able to follow up with. Awesome. All right, Jenny, go ahead from there.
Yeah, mine wasn't so much about the content. I really knew where I was going with this. I had the beginning and the end, but for me, it was all about time. That was my biggest struggle. So when the request came out from Mike about needing more raptor stories in the submissions, it was really nearing like the end of the submission period. So we only had a couple days to submit. And at first I was kind of resistant because I was like, oh, that's not a lot of time. Maybe I'm not going to do this. And so I kind of pushed that aside, but then this idea was, nagging at my brain and wasn't going to let it go. And I said, you know what? I've got a cool idea. I've got to write this. And from first draft to submission was 2 days. So it was a very fast turnaround. And I know that can be hard with like all of life's distractions. So something that I focused on, and I've studied this in the past and have continued to, is this idea of getting into the flow state when you write. So, tapping into, your alpha state to really like push away all the distractions, get hyper focused. And then, the words just somehow miraculously just kind of pour themselves onto the page. So for me, that was the biggest struggle, was the timing, just to get through it really quick.
Yeah. That's very understandable. There were quite a few people who like managed to jump in really quickly when I was like, all right, we got a ton of stories about crows, we got a ton of stories about songbirds, almost no birds of prey. That's what happened during the submission window. So I ended up putting out a call for like specifically, can we get like a bunch more of those? And thank you for jumping on that really quickly. Somebody else who was, very fast on that one was Crystal. And so Crystal, I'll have you pop on next.
Yeah, so I did get the call when you specifically were looking for birds of prey. So I think I wrote the story like from idea to submission 4 days, I think 3 or 4 days. So the hardest part for me, I decided early on I wanted to do Harris hawks. And one of the things I love about Harris hawks is that they're one of the few birds of prey that are cooperative when they hunt. They actually hunt in groups of 3 or 4. And they'll stack on top of each other, like up to 5 high on a cactus or something on a perch in the desert. And they'll even coordinate their attacks where there's like 3 different group styles of attacks that researchers have tracked and categorized that they'll like coordinate with each other. So I knew that I wanted the cooperative nature to show up at some point in my story. But then the problem that I ran into was, as I was trying to decide how I was going to make this speculative and what I was going to do with it, I had this very clear scene in my head that was the opening scene of the story. And it was cheerleaders arguing in a back alley. And I was like, how do these two fit together? I really had no idea. So that was the hardest part for me, is like my brain was giving me the story in pieces. And I honestly didn't know. I was like, what are you trying to tell me? But my husband is really, really great at diagnosing story for me. And I also have a friend that I talked to. So I went and I told them, okay, have this crazy idea for these cheerleaders. And this is what's happening. And then here's the other part of the story. And I don't know how to put them together. And it was actually in that conversation with my husband where it wasn't even something he said. I was just having the conversation with him, and suddenly I saw the next piece of the story and it all fit together. So that for me was like trying to figure out how to make the story pieces that I had in my mind actually work together as a coherent story was the biggest part of my struggle for this. And to do that in the amount of time, because usually stories take a long time to cook in my brain, but I didn't have that time. So I had to like compress that by talking to people and trying to force my brain to put it together. So.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, it's also, Becky's also commenting on the chat. It's amazing how just talking out loud can solve the problem. So yeah, I would agree with that. And also, just because we're here and talking about the Harris Hawks, I'm going to hold up at least the brief of the 3 Harris Hawks. So yeah, we'll continue detailing those and pop that one up in soon. And Elena, go ahead and jump in. What was the biggest struggle, and how did you deal with that one?
So one of the struggles, hilariously, I usually want to start with character voice, but it really was a struggle also, because trying to find the balance between landing the character voice or it being read as, does she not know English? So that was a little bit of a struggle for me. Also, initially, I posted a different intro in the Wolfpack group, and a lot of people commented, "Oh, what's his desire?" And I wanted to really focus on about this character who wanted to be a bird to kind of escape his life, but you would figure that out all later. And I didn't have time to write a whole big story, so I cheated. My story is very short; it's like 1,500 words. But at the same time, I like how it plays with identity, and I don't know, I think the character voice came out, but that to me, like what South African words to include, what not. I wanted to call my relatives in South Africa, and I was like, this is gonna be a really weird phone call. I'm not doing it. But anyhow, to me, that was a big struggle.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's see. Couple quick comments. I've noticed in the comment section there was a question about doves. There was a dove story submitted. And it was a very cool murderous dove story, and there were certain reasons why it just didn't quite line up. So concept-wise, it probably totally could have worked, but there were some reasons why it just didn't line up. So it's always hard to tell. Like if you take something that seems like it's breaking a trope or doing something really different, it might end up being a perfect fit for an anthology or whatever kind of submission window you're doing. And then as a follow-up, there was a question about coming up with the theme of the anthology. And since we're a little bit short on time, I'm going to bump that one over to the end so that if we do have people that need to pop off early, we can do that. And then I'll kind of address that as we further in. So we've got two more questions that are kind of pre-planned for the group. And I'll note that one of the people who would want to be here is feeling ill. This is Desmond Destaire, is not able to be on here today. And he wrote the Obsidian Grackle story, which is a semi-science fiction set at a military base. And it's a very fun story. Definitely looking forward to putting that out in the world and having more people read it. But we're going to go into the question on advice. We only have a few people who are going to be talking on advice. Do you have advice for short story authors looking to get their work published? So Martin, can I have you get us started there? What advice do you have for short story authors looking to publish?
Well, first is the most important side is finish the story. And you need to start thinking about productivity in finishing the story, because if you build your one perfect story and then polish it forever, you're never selling it or anything else. So learn to find where the line is of good enough and then get it out to market. Go to the different market sites, go to the Facebook groups for calls for submissions and so on. But the most important thing is you've got to get it out there. Short stories, my opinion, should not be taking you months. They should be taking you weeks if it's really trouble. But I believe that any author who's managed to start getting some short stories out there has the potential to be doing a story per week. And I know that sounds intimidating to people, but as those of us who've been through Writers of the Future can say, we can do one in a day. Now, it may need some polish, so you may need more than a day, but putting together the elements is something you learn to do, and then polishing up those elements and getting it out there. Don't be spending forever on one perfect story, because it's not perfect and it never will be. Let somebody see the imperfect beauty.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that, Martin. All right, we're going to jump over to Michael and then Becky.
Yeah, so my advice would be directly linked, I guess, to this particular, my inclusion in this particular anthology, and that is that you should not be afraid to rework, relook at, and redress pieces depending on submission calls. As anyone who submits short stories will know, there are so many different submission calls and so many different markets that are looking for stories, that just because you perhaps don't find a home for something in the place you had initially thought, does not mean that, a few months down the line, a few weeks down the line, a few years down the line, another submission call might come along, and you can take that story and redress it, give it a new coat of paint, and send it back out there. which is exactly what I did. And yeah, I think people talk a lot about sort of killing your darlings, but I think redressing your darlings is something as well. And yeah, that would be my bit of advice. Is don't be adverse to that. And of course, that's easier with the longer time goes on, the less sort of affection you have for these things that you write. You kind of more open to the idea of tinkering with them and perhaps sending them down a different road, or adding different components that you wouldn't have considered first. But yeah, that would be my advice for the day, such as it is.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, and those two also kind of go hand in hand, because like if you have one story written and you might be afraid to change it for anything, but if you have 20 stories written and you already have a few sales under your belt, then like being like, I can try this one in this direction, even if I'm not sure if it'll work. And sometimes it's a perfect fit and it's hard to tell. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. And Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I was going to say feeds like directly into that, and that is, don't be afraid to experiment and try new things. When I first started writing, I was like a theme appropriate magpie, where I would like pick up writing advice everywhere I found it and like try to like force my writing and like each new shiny idea, like, oh, this is going to work and this is the magic formula and that's not how it works. But if I hadn't taken in all those different pieces of advice and poked at my writing and tried to do lots of different things and always tried to challenge and experiment, then I wouldn't have eventually found my voice and the things that I like to write about. So don't be afraid to like break the rules and do something new and fresh. Find what works for you. And if you're doing this, you have to have faith in yourself, because this is a really hard business. It's an art, but it's also a business. And so you have to believe in yourself and give yourself lots of grace, because it's tough out there. So you just kind of got to keep at it and don't be afraid to try new things.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. So we're going to switch into our final pre-planned question. I know we've been filtering in some others along the way. And then after that one, if there are people who need to pop off, you're welcome to do so. And then otherwise, we'll leave it open for at least a bit for people to launch out some other questions. But the follow-up that I want to ask and invite some other people who maybe didn't necessarily plan on the question, but just in case something's come up and you want to share, what is next for you, and where can people find out more about you and your writing? This is the opportunity to plug new publications or older publications, as you will, because one of the great things about anthologies, in my opinion, is that you have an opportunity as a reader to find a bunch of new authors, and if you like their voice, then check out their other stuff. If you read an anthology and are like, all right, this person's cool, I'm going to go find out where else they are, then yeah, that's an excellent thing to do. So I definitely want to extend that as much as possible as an opportunity to everyone here. And we'll go ahead and start with John. And John, as a follow-up, there was a question about the artwork that you do and asking how much that's tied into your writing process. So John, if you want to share where we can find you, what else you're working on, and a little bit about the artwork, go ahead.
Sure. All right. As far as where you can find me, let's see. I have a couple of profiles on Instagram. Like one is John K. Patterson. Another is called Paleo Espresso. It's like paleontology and espresso mixed together. And because I've actually done like a lot of paleo art, prehistoric animal art illustrations using coffee, like a watercolor paint. And I've really loved the effect that had. And actually, I did the illustration for ZT's story with like a T-Rex and a chicken using coffee. So that was a great opportunity. My stuff is available on Amazon. You just like look for John K. Patterson. I'm already featured in a couple of anthologies. And then I'm excited for this one to come out too. And as for what's coming next, I'm working on River Trap, which is like the next Queensland Crater universe story, featuring the Spinosaurus and some hunters that are going to run afoul of a very cranky, very big version of that creature. And that will be coming out, I believe, before Christmas. And I've got like a writers conference to go to, and it'll be a lot of fun, because I find this story has just been something I've toiled at for a long time. But finally found like the emotional hook for it. And so I can't wait to get it finished and bring it out for everyone to see.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, John. All right. And, as we're going through, if people want to post any links to the chat, they're also welcome to do that as well. All right. David, go ahead.
I can be found at, the easiest way to find me is through my website, davidhankins.com. I'm on Facebook and Twitter. And as far as what's coming next, I have a story coming out in Unidentified Funny Objects 9, which I know he just sent out the ebooks to the Kickstarters. And so that one will be available generally coming soon. And I'll be at Superstars in February and Writers of the Future in April. So looking forward to meeting a whole bunch of people.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Going over to Becky, who actually just posted a thing in the chat. Go ahead and let us know more about that.
Yeah. So if you write flash fiction, we do a monthly flash fiction contest, and you can submit from the 7th to the end of the month. So we just opened today, actually, to submissions, and it's themed. So that's always a lot of fun. I love writing to themes. And then if you want to find out more about me, you can go to RebeccaEtreasure.com or check me out on Twitter. My most recent published story was Homunculus, that's publicly available as Homunculus and Seize the Press magazine. So you can find that. I can throw a link in the chat in just a second. So thanks. It was really fun being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And Martin, go ahead.
You can find information on all of my projects in my woefully behind the curve website, shoemaker.space. I'm way behind on updating it. More likely to catch up with me, Martin L. Shoemaker on Facebook or Shoemaker Space on Twitter. My next big project, which is keeping me from getting any writing done, is FireCon coming up this weekend. I want to say 15 sessions I'm in. So I am scrambling to be ready for those sessions. Fortunately, some of them are group work, so I can just be participant, not a planner, and putting slides together and everything. My next work coming out, there is another of Bane's Weird World War books coming out next spring. I think it's spring, might be summer. World War III China, Weird World War III China. And I have a story in that one, which is excuse me, it's a departure from some of my other ones. It's not part of any particular series, but I had fun with it. It is, I think, going to be one of my favorites down the road. I've also got an anthology that I will be in. I don't know if I can say this or not officially yet. I don't know if he's made the announcements, but there's a Space Force anthology coming out that I will have a story in. But the thing I'm most excited about is next year, Robert Silverberg and Brian Thomas Schmidt are doing a anthology of robot stories of the history of robots in science fiction. And it is mostly reprints by people by the name of, Ambrose Bierce, Moxon's Master, which was one of the first science fiction stories I ever read. There's, I believe, a Bradbury story in there. There are a lot of old classics, and then there's a very small number of new stories. And they asked me for a new Carrie story. For those of you who've read Today I Am Paul and Today I Am Carrie, they've asked me for a new Carrie story, and I figured out a way I could do it without breaking the existing story. And so look for Today I Know. Is that the right title? Today I Know, or I think it's Today I Understand, coming out in that anthology next year. And to be in that anthology side by side with the people I grew up reading, I am just beaming over that.
Awesome. Congratulations. Yeah. So I am also going to say that I absolutely love Today I Am Carrie. So yes, if you are somebody who likes reading the Asimov style robotic stories and you really want to get like the sentimental side in there with your science fiction, Today I Am Carrie is an amazing book. Absolutely love that one. Yeah. And I guess I'll jump on the bandwagon as well. So yeah, so myself and Rebecca will also be teaching at FireCon. So for those of you who haven't yet registered and are wondering if you should, maybe this is an incentive to, you can check out FireCon. That's next weekend. And for those of you who are going anyway, cool. Check out the check out these classes. Oh, Martin, did you have a comment on that?
This weekend.
This weekend. Yes.
4 days. Actually,
Yes.
Tuesday, Wednesday, 3 days. It starts Thursday.
Soon. All right. So we'll find that out soon. Yeah. And then for my part, I'm working on the Murderbirds anthology. That's definitely one of the big ones that's taking up some of my time. Had a recent publication come out in Dreamforge, called No Place in Space. That one I think is still free to read online. And then had one come out in Brave New Worlds, from Zombies Need Brains. That was the end of this last summer. And that one I was actually commissioned to write a song for it. So weird stuff happens sometimes. But the one that I can't not mention while I'm out here, The Impossible Moon, book 4 of This Fine Crew, released a week before this last Friday. So this is still like fairly hot off the presses. So yes, if you like space opera, if you like the Star Trek style things, then that is something that I do. And I guess as the final question that we had in the chat before I kind of open it up and see if there are any last bits was about coming up with the anthology theme and kind of getting that started. So here's the brief background on that. I had written up a lot of concepts for anthology themes, and I knew I wanted to put one together from these author support communities. Because being involved in Superstars and Apex and Writers of the Future, and now TWT, the Writing Tribe, and then local to Virginia, James River Writers, I see so many of these calls out to just the world in general, and yet I keep seeing a lot of the same names from a lot of these same groups anyway, and there are times when I'm talking to the editors and they're like, I really wish that I just kept it in house because I like working with the people who I already know and who I feel like are authors who are dedicated to being part of this process and part of the community. And so I was like, all right, I want to build something like that within the community. And so I started throwing out just titles and seeing what stuck. And Murderbirds was one of them. The whole Unhelpful Encyclopedia series is like, let's take different kinds of creatures and one not creature and write stories that might be slightly irreverent about how they can be involved in murder plots. And so Murderbirds, Murderbugs, and some others that I won't mention yet because they'll come out later, were things that I just started saying on Zoom calls with people. And when I was at conferences and conventions, just seeing what people laughed at or reacted to. And Murderbirds got the biggest reaction, possibly because I had a parrot on my shoulder the first time that it came up. And then at a later time, we were talking about cassowaries, and somebody else used the term Murderbirds to refer to them because, yeah. And I'm like, all right, cool. This seems like a good first go. And then I started just throwing out to different communities, all right, I'm going to set up an anthology call for this. And I think to a lot of the Superstars community in particular, it looked like it was a very fast, boom idea, boom anthology call, boom selections, and Kickstarter go. The truth is that it's something that has been brewing in the background for longer than that. And the goal was always to be able to set up an anthology series so that we could have a lot of these authors within these communities who continue to want to work together and who are continuing to want to build each other up. So for the next anthology that we'll do for this Unhelpful Encyclopedia series, we are going to be doing Murderbugs. And that one I'm going to be putting out more advanced notice, including mentioning it here. And most likely we're going to open that in April. We're going to open the call for that in April is the plan for the moment, but I'll be posting as we get closer to. And the same kind of thing, we're going to be looking into the author education and support communities. So Superstars, Apex, Writers of the Future, Wolfpack. There are probably a couple more that will join that group because we're wanting to work with authors and editors and people who are doing their own kind of concept art and people who have new ideas about how to bring fiction into new kind of media, and just build from there. So yeah, there are a lot of ideas. and some of them sound a little bit crazy, but crazy is part of the fun. And we'll kind of see where that goes from there. All right, that is my open-ended commentary without revealing far too much in one go. And we are a little bit past the hour, so definitely thank you all for staying with us for this amount of time. Are there any other questions that we didn't get to address that people still want to ask? Feel free to pop them into the chat. Or any questions from authors to other authors on here, just in case. All right. Well, I think that's going to go ahead and close this out. I'm going to stop the recording in just a bit. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so very much for being part of this project and for backing the Kickstarter as well, because that definitely means a lot that we were able to build that up enough that not only is this anthology becoming a reality, but we are actually planning on doing another 2 next year and continuing to grow from there. So that is awesome. Thank you all for being part of this, and thank you authors for showing up and answering the questions. Yeah, this was really enjoyable. All right. Well, have a good night, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and turn it to gallery mode. Feel free to pop on camera or microphone and wave goodbye if you'd like. So say hi and bye.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care, guys. Bye bye.